Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. I'm Nightbuzzer and in this tutorial I'm gonna show you how to use the Cine Camera Actor inside Unreal. Now I have this scene that you can download for free now for a month on the marketplace, which looks pretty amazing, so go check that out along with other free stuff. I'm gonna start by creating a folder inside my inside my content browser. I'm gonna call this sequencer. And here I'm gonna create a level sequence. Open it and click on this button to create a Cine Camera Actor. Now you can move around. So I'm just gonna go over here, maybe, or maybe here over the piano. I'm just gonna click on G to hide all that stuff. This is the first thing that you wanna set up. What type of sensor do you use? I'm gonna choose 16 by 9 DSLR, but you can also do custom ones or set some values here, but the 16 by 9 is gonna work perfectly. So now here are the lens settings. You can either pick something from here, from this list. I think they're took from real life cameras, these values, but I usually leave it to universal zoom and I do the parameters myself. Now from here you can create a minimum and maximum focal length that you're gonna set down here. Now you can only set a value between these two, and also in this one regarding the aperture. Now the focal length means how wide is your shot. For example, this one, mine is 35 millimeters. Now if I set it to 80, it's gonna create a more cinematic shot. You see that it's not that stretched on the edges. And if I set this to 15, you can see it's very wide. But I'm gonna leave it to 50 maybe, to create something in between, let's say. And this is the f-stop or the aperture. And also you can only set values between these two, which is down here. Mine is 2.8, but I'm gonna choose 1.4. And you can see that I did that and the scene got brighter, because in real life cameras work like that. So if your aperture is lower, that means the lens are more open and let more light to come in. I mean, I hope I'm explaining that right, but I'm sure you'll get it. For example, if I set this to 5, it's gonna be much darker because the lenses are more covered with that aperture. I'm gonna put some pictures on the screen so you can see what I mean. But I'm just gonna leave it to 1.4 for now. Then, moving on from the focal length and f-stop, we have the squeeze factor, which I'm gonna show you later in the video what we'll use that for. And this is the blade count. And this is how many sides does the bokeh effect have. I mean, these are lens flare, but I'm just gonna set it to 6. So it's gonna be the same. Then we have the focus, the main focal point. So obviously in my scene I want the piano to be the focal point and the background to be more blurred. So I can either drag this slider until it reaches the piano, or I can take this pick icon or whatever it's called, and it's gonna appear on the screen, and if you tap the piano, it's gonna set the focal point on the piano. And if you wanna be more precise, you can check this box and so if you check this box, plane, it's gonna appear, which is gonna cover the focal point. So for example, this is in focus, this part right where the plane touches the object, and you can make this plane another color if you want, but I usually leave it to default because I don't really care about that. Now let me take my exposure back up. And let's move on. So I've set my focal point. I have my scene, the aperture, the focal lengths are okay. Then we have this crop settings. Now you can use this to crop your frame, for example 4:3 or 1:1 if you want, 16:9, but I'm not gonna use any crop because it doesn't need to be cropped because it's already in 16:9 ratio. Okay, so we're done with the camera settings. I hope you understood what I said about these settings, and feel free to ask me any questions in the comments down below. Now let's move. We're gonna leave this to default because it doesn't affect the scene that much, and let's move on to the lens properties. Bloom. You can set the intensity here, the threshold, and a bunch of stuff really, but we're not going there. I'm just gonna show you where you can edit these things. And from this tab you can check the exposure to make the scene brighter. So I'm gonna choose 14 because that's what's in my post-process volume, and it works fine for my scene. And of course you have more settings that you can play with, but I'm just gonna show you what's next. Chromatic aberration, you see that distortion effect, but I'm not gonna use in this scene. Dirt mask, if you have one, you're just gonna slot it in and put an intensity value. And this tab uses more advanced stuff that probably a photographer would know, like shutter speed. This is how fast a camera takes a shot, in 1 second or 12 seconds or a fraction of a second, you know. But I never use this, so you can play around with the ISO if you want. This is going to make the scene brighter or darker, just like the exposure. F-stop, again the aperture. Local exposure, now if you check this, these are very good. So if you want to control the highlights or the shadows, how bright or how dark they are. I usually don't have a problem with this, but it's nice to know. And this is gonna make more contrast. You can just play around with it. Okay, next we have lens flares, which are these things. The reflection that happens in the lens when looking at an emissive object, if you know what I mean. And from here you can adjust the intensity, but I'm gonna take it down a bit, maybe to 0.4. And all the tint and the bokeh size, if it's bigger or smaller. I'm probably gonna make it bigger. The threshold and bokeh shape if you want other types of shapes. I'm sure you can find some textures online somewhere. And then we have image effects, vignette, which is nice to add in certain images, but don't overdo it like this because it's gonna, sometimes it might work, sometimes it might not, but I usually leave this off and do it in post-production if I need to. Okay, moving on, we have color grading if you want, like the temperature, if you want a warmer scene or darker scene, or a colder scene. Then we have saturation, gamma, contrast, anything you can imagine, shadows. It's gonna affect the shadows, the midtones, the highlights. And here are some settings that might be similar to the post-process volume, like ambient occlusion and cube map and post-process materials, or even translucency type and parameters for that, and also the path tracing settings, which I'm gonna enable. I'm gonna set this to 2 and this to 128. And from here you can apply film grain if you want. Yeah, let's add a bit, because why not? Makes the scene more interesting. And I think that's enough for this part of the video. And let's check how it looks in path tracing. Okay, I like it, but I think that we need to take down the exposure a bit. It's quite much. Maybe to 13. Yeah, let's create a bit more moody light. And I'm also going to enable the temperature to make the scene a bit more desaturated, because it's very yellow. I'm gonna make it something like this. I think it looks pretty fine. Okay, so this is the final result. But now let's change some settings and create an anamorphic camera. And if you don't know what anamorphic is instead of this circle shaped bokeh effect, it's gonna be oval. I'm not really sure of how it works. You can find videos on YouTube about that, but I'm just gonna show you how you can create one type of camera that you see in those cinematic movies, which look awesome. So we need to go back here into the settings tab and change this to custom and set these values, the height to 25 and the sensor width to 31. Now we can play around, of course, but I found these values to look great with Anamorphic Cine Camera Actor. And it did nothing yet, because we have to mess with the squeeze factor, which for these values I'm gonna set to the maximum, to 2. And if I press F11, you can see that it's perfect aspect ratio 21:9. But if you set a wider value for the sensor, you can take this to maybe 1.6 or 1.3. It depends on the scene and on the settings here. But let me just adjust the focal length so we can see the effect better. So I'm just gonna set this to 80 maybe, and let's go like this. I'm gonna go closer to the piano and choose the focal distance to be here on the sheet. Now you can see here some oval shaped lights, and if you look closely, if I do the squeeze factor, you can see how it's getting from round to oval. And even at a value about 1.4, it still looks nice, but I'm gonna set it to 2. And one more aspect that we need to cover is anamorphic cameras have some chromatic aberration happening. So we're gonna go back to those settings and create a bit of chromatic aberration, but just slightly. I'm just gonna 0.5 maybe. And let's check how it looks in path tracing. I mean, it looks pretty nice. But I'm just gonna play around with the focal length and aperture until I get the effect that I want. Because I want this wider view of the piano and also quite a blurred background. So I'm gonna set the value to 1 maybe. Oh, but I need to set the minimum f-stop to 1 so that I can use the 1 value here. Let's render and see how the final result looks. Okay, so this is the final shot for the anamorphic camera. I think it looks great. What do you think? I'm gonna show you a comparison between the two so you can see the difference. And since they added the anamorphic camera, I'm I'm not letting it go. I'm only using that. For some reason, I'm too obsessed with it right now. That was the video. I hope you liked it and you found it useful. And if you did, make sure to subscribe, like, and share if you want. I'm gonna post soon more tutorials regarding other programs as well, if you're interested. And I'll see you on the next one. Have a great day. Bye.